elections. And so for this discussion, we have 3 panelists, so far 2 on the call. We have Sylvia Nanja, who is the editor-in-chief of Uganda Radio Network. We also have Dr. Peter Mwesige, who is the co-founder and executive director of the African Center for Media Excellence. You're welcome to the discussion panel, and everyone else.
Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn.
Yeah. So as the topic already suggests, the topic already suggests, the role of the media in promoting peace before, during, and after elections. Let me start with Peter. How critical is the role of the media in promoting peace? Sometimes people call it peace journalism. Is this something that the media should be focusing on?
Thank you, Evelyn. Good morning. My own sense is that the media should be focusing on good journalism. Whatever these names are, whether you call it peace journalism, whether you call it conflict-sensitive reporting, the key is to focus on good journalism that is accurate, that provides context, that is fair, that pretty much helps the citizen understand what's going on, what's at stake, who is responsible for whatever may have gone wrong, what can be done to correct it, and so on and so forth. I don't think that journalists need to have the baggage of having to see themselves as the arbiters, as peacemakers or anything like that. The other thing perhaps to say for our context is that we live in a country where sometimes you have a degree of impunity, and the media play a role, including promoting peace, in contexts where the political system is responsive. If the media shame public officials, for instance, over actions that are unbecoming, untold and so on, are they able to correct course? And I think in our case, from over the years, we have seen that that's not always the case. So the media can only do so much in such circumstances. I think ultimately the real big job here, the onus is on those who are in charge, the Electoral Commission, the incumbent, of course, as the president of the country, the government, the ruling party, and the opposition candidates. I think that the media can play its role, but by and large, if those who are in charge, do not offer Ugandans an opportunity for peace, for justice, for fairness, we're not going to see, what we're talking about here.
Yes, of course, you've talked about the fairness, you've talked about issues of balance, and if the environment is not conducive for them, they wouldn't do it, Yeah, we've seen from the coverage so far, what has been happening in the country. Journalists, but also the citizens dealing with issues of, election violence. Does this affect, the way the media, in this sense, actually reports the news, because they cannot be promoting peace when they're out there covering the events and they're being beaten, they're being harassed? How does that play around?
Like we have said, ordinarily the media's role would be to, report what is happening as accurately and fairly as possible, without a lens of an activist or without a lens of, an actor. Of course, it is easier said than done. Ultimately, these guys in the media are also citizens, and they have emotions. And I think when you turn your guns as police on journalists, you actually risk turning attention away from other aspects of the elections to just that, violence. And I think, as you've seen in the last few days, there have been lots of stories on the violence unleashed towards the media, which has not been the case in the past, because the media tended to cover more about what the candidates were saying than what was happening to them. So I suspect that the actions of police and security agencies have actually ended up emboldening journalists to make the issue of violence an even bigger story. But at the same time, we have to be realistic. We cannot sweep some of these issues under the carpet. The truth is that this election has ultimately been about police unleashing violence against the opposition in the name of protecting us against COVID. It has been about the police selectively implementing, COVID-19 regulations. It has been about Ugandans being killed through excessive use of force. Yes, some Ugandans did take to the streets in ways that went beyond what you would call a peaceful demonstration. But I don't think that the reaction of the police, inspired any confidence in citizens who want to see peace or the absence of conflict. And those are issues that journalists have got to report as they are happening. I don't think that it would be fair for those issues to be swept under the carpet in the name of promoting peace.
Yeah, thank you so much. Maybe Sylvia can jump in here. As an editor, as someone who is out there, receiving these stories, reporting on these stories, following these stories for your media house. How has your media house reported, some of these issues? Sylvia? You're muted.
Thank you, Evelyn. When we started the campaign process, or actually the electoral process, long before the campaigns, our journalists were reminded, we held trainings before that, were reminded that we are entering into this, but we expect professionalism, we expect accuracy, we expect objectivity and balanced coverage. And that's all we have to do to ensure that we deliver good journalism. We have a project that we are running that is deliberately looking at that, Peter has said it's just a name, but it has to be good journalism. It is promoting conflict-sensitive journalism, and we are looking at the kind of language that we often use that probably is not appropriate for communication, not appropriate for the different people, audiences that we are serving, not appropriate for the candidates that we are covering. So we entered into this deliberately, but along the way we are also switching, because we are not moving away from being accurate and ensuring that we are objective and balanced, but our tactics, the way we gather news and all that is changing a little bit. Because if you feel that I'm putting this reporter in harm's way when I send them to cover a political rally, then why should I send them there? So we are kind of being held back a little bit because we think that our safety, we are not very safe out there because of the way the security forces are treating media personnel. But we also know that the public is counting on us. We know that the public is looking at us as a watchdog, as a campaign platform, the open forum for debate and all those things. Because when we started, you know that many candidates are not able to go out there to campaign. The candidates are actually relying on us as the media to deliver their message. There's a presidential candidate who didn't go where he was expected, and he said, all I'm going to do is talk to the press, and then the press will do it because this is a scientific campaign. It's business unusual for many of us. We have people like me who have covered like 3 election cycles, but this time round, I'm also learning on the job because I haven't covered a virtual one. Is it virtual anyway? It is supposed to be virtual, but it's not. So we are also learning on the job, and it becomes tricky for all of us, for the new crop of journalists that we have, the ones that we have to remind all the time that this is how you're supposed to do it, the ones that we have to teach, that when you're covering campaigns, this is what you have to do to remain neutral, this is what you have to say and when to say it. So it's a bit challenging for many of us, including editors, but many people are learning on the job this time around.
Okay, so you said you talked about something about trying to, shift and find new ways of trying to tell the stories despite the challenges that you're facing. Is this something that you have seen has improved your coverage of the elections or the way the journalists are then reporting these issues? Has it improved, or has it made it easier for the journalists then to report these stories?
It's not something that I would say I'm proud of, because if I say Museveni is campaigning in Tisenyi or Bobi Wine is campaigning in this area, but please don't go there. After all, the TVs are showing it live. Let's focus on the TV. That is not the kind of journalism that I would want to promote. But under the circumstances, sometimes we have to step back and plan and see how else can we get this story. URN has a different approach to news, that we don't focus so much on the event, but we look out for the issues. So if we know the issues in that particular campaign or anything or event, then we can take the story forward even without being there. So, but there are times when our subscribers actually want that story that is happening at the event. But then you cannot send someone there because the situation is not good enough. It's not something that I would be proud of, but I mean, given the circumstances, we have done it sometimes, not all the time.
So in general, what kind of stories, if you reflect back, on the kind of stories that you've reported, are these stories that focus more on the violence that Peter talked about? Because largely that's what we've seen the election or the campaigns have been about. If you reflect back, what are those, how do you think your coverage has been? Has it focused more on the issues that are happening? Has it focused more on the violence that has been meted, both on the opposition, but also on journalists and citizens?
We have written about the violence as an event, but then we look back at what is triggering this level of violence. We look at the issues in the campaign, we look at the messages that the candidates are taking there, and then what exactly is causing this violence? Because for every happening, there is a cause. We don't want to look at what is happening, what has happened, without looking at where it is coming from. Are people so angry that they cannot listen to whatever the security forces are saying? Then you go back and understand why the people are angry. So what we are doing is including more community voices in our stories. Even when there's a candidate campaigning in an area, we want to talk to the people where this candidate has gone. Let's listen to them. Let's know why it is very hard for someone, if it is hard anyway, for someone to listen to an order from the security forces and follow what the security forces are saying. It is very easy for someone to find a roadblock and remove the barricades and say we are proceeding, even when the police says you cannot go beyond this. So that is what we are doing. We are amplifying more community voices. We call them authentic voices in our stories. So our sourcing goes beyond the candidates and the security forces.
Okay. Let me come back to you, Peter. We are in this era of social media having taken over from, before, in the past elections, we've not had as much social media, or it wasn't even there. But now with social media, there's a lot of news or content coming in when it comes to election-related news. But also there's the issue of fake news and misinformation and disinformation. So in this sense, if we are talking about the role of the media in promoting peace during elections, how do these issues interplay? Social media, fake news, disinformation, is this something that has affected how the media then reports the issues? Thank you. You are muted, Peter, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We have to remember that for very many people out there, social media, mainstream media, they're all media. The key point is that they're hungry for information, and they're getting information from these sources about the elections. There have been a lot of questions or concerns about the standards that are employed by social media. Obviously, whereas they have filled a very important gap by informing us about issues that the mainstream sometimes are scared of, showing, for instance, the levels of violence, unleashed in different parts of the country on the opposition. they have also sometimes tended to go overboard when it comes to sensational reporting about claims of people who have been killed, people who have been arrested, and so on. In some cases, actually, they have also, tended to incite, some of those platforms have tended to incite, ethnic hatred or something like that. And it's a very big challenge for the media. I think that one, not only do the media have to report now on events around the candidates, the issues, their manifestos, they also have now a big job to report on what social media is doing, to debunk some of the claims, on social media, some of the misinformation on social media. And it becomes quite a very big, ask for organizations that really have only a number of people, reporting. In other countries, I mean, the media, social media, covering social media is a whole bit. You would have several journalists just focusing on that. But in other contexts, I mean, most of these newsrooms, save for the ones like Uganda Radio Network, which are slightly bigger, do not have the kind of numbers, to run around chasing the candidates, but also, run around looking at what is going on social media, debunking it and all that. So for me, I would say that the citizen out there has to be much sharper in terms of improving their understanding of the dynamics of media. We need media literacy today more than ever before. Citizens must know, the things they see on social media are not always, accurate. Before they forward, they need to understand, who is the source here? Is this a credible source? If it is URN, yes, because URN has a name to protect. If it is Monitor, perhaps, yes, because Monitor has a name to protect. If it is some platform you don't know about, ask your relatives, ask friends before you quickly, share this kind of information. But I mean, we can't go back. The genie is out of the bottle. We can't go back. And social media is really going to have a very big influence on the kind of actions you see from Ugandans, including potentially, violence or conflict. And I'm not saying that that will justify some of the attempts we have seen at denying citizens the right to use these platforms to report about the campaigns. It is their right. I think the conversation should be, how do we moderate this conversation? How do we ensure that, what we are hearing from social media is, moderated by voices of reason, in the mainstream media, and that maybe some of our young friends who are posting some of these things sort of prevail upon to be a little more contextual, to offer more perspective, to be less sensational, less excited, and to really just focus on the issues as it were. But Evelyn, before I hand over, I wanted just to clarify something. Whereas the reporting, as Sylvia has rightly said, has focused a lot on the violence, violence can be both an event and an issue, and I think it is, in fact, in our case, it has been both an event, Bobby Wine is being beaten, or Amuriat is being tear gassed, that is an event. But it is also an issue because violence has come to characterize most of our elections since 2001. And I think the key issue then for journalists, the role of journalists then would be, beyond showing us these images of violence, how do they help us understand what's going on here, contextualize it in the history that we have had recently, because even before COVID-19, for instance, we had the Public Order Management Act being used by police to stop the opposition from exercising their right to freedom of assembly, So those are issues that we need to put in context as we report about some of these events.
Thank you, Peter. I kind of missed the other issues because if you had noticed, my internet had gone off, so I've just gotten back. So I missed some of the points that you actually talked about. But that's fine. Maybe we shall get to know that much later. But also, you raise an important issue of social media having to come in to fill gaps where, for example, the traditional media, as we know them, sometimes constrained by regulations, by the rules that have been put in place by UCC coming in to say you cannot report about some of these issues, or this is what you can report on and you cannot report on. And then in that sense, have the current regulations that we have in place, the different regulations that we have in place, have they in any way also affected the way the media would report things that are happening in the country, in as much as they want to promote an environment where people are able to discuss issues, but also to focus on things that are happening and not necessarily create tension or violence during the elections.
Is that mine?
Sorry?
Is that my question?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. On paper, by the way, if you look at the guidelines that the Uganda Communications Commission, released together with the Electoral Commission on media coverage of elections, of course, they borrowed quite liberally from ACME's own guidelines on elections. They are generally progressive. I mean, there's not very much controversy about what they are saying in there. I think the real challenge comes to the implementation, comes to those, unreported in many cases, pressures that the media face, over phone calls, not even in letters that are written to them about where they are going. I have heard from very many journalists, for instance, that not only are they cautious and worried about reporting on some of the events transpiring, they are now also scared about expressing themselves on social media. They are very measured. In fact, some of them, if you have noticed, some of them have begun talking in parables. They write tweets which you have to read, several times probably you can make sense of, what they are trying to say here and there. So there are real pressures on these journalists. I think in some cases, media houses have been told, you can't read with this story, even if you have to read that story, use a story, maybe bring it up in after 20 minutes. It shouldn't be your main story, and so on and so forth. And I think in that environment, we have ended up giving the social media, first of all, more credibility, because the credibility of the mainstream is in some ways affected by what the public perceive as either fear, self-censoring, whatever you call it. But the public can see through these things. They know what's going on, and they know what they are being told from the mainstream. So they end up turning to social media because that's where they can get some of these events, uncut, to use that language.
All right, thank you for that. Sylvia, is this a challenge that you face, the regulations that have been put in place? Has it in any way affected the kind of stories that you end up publishing or covering? And how have you dealt with that?
The regulations by UCC?
Yes, and all these, regulations that are in place in terms of media, trying to say you cannot report about this because you're probably creating tension or creating or inciting violence also in a way. What do they think? I mean, the stories might be true, but in how would I say, in the eyes of the state or in the eyes of the regulators, this is something that is inciting violence, even if it could be the truth.
Unfortunately, or fortunately rather, we haven't had cases where we have to keep a story away or fail to cover a story because we think someone will be annoyed or someone will not be happy with us. We have an understanding or a feeling that if something is factual and it's accurate and I have verified all the information, then there's no reason why I should actually not publish it. However, I know that there are stories that we put up on our website and the subscribers don't pick them up because URL, the way we operate is that the story will be on the website and it will be accessed by the subscribers. But there are stories that you see that subscribers are not picking up. Maybe the censorship is at that level that URL will publish, but then the people who are supposed to use the product are not using it. But we haven't had a scenario where we say because of the UCC guidelines, because of the state, because the government will think this of us, we should not publish that story or we should not go ahead and cover it because we believe that if it's factual and accurate, then we can go whichever mile we have to go with the story.
So for now, what have you?
So yes, I wanted to chip in there very quickly. URN does a pretty good job when it comes to political reporting. But I think like Sylvia is saying, the challenge is that very many radio stations in this country are owned by people who are quite scared about shaking up the establishment. And because of that, very few of them are giving enough time to the kind of, deep, reflective, investigative, or explanatory reporting that you would expect in election time. So, and that's true, because our ACME's own research has found that although most Ugandans listen to radio, as their first source of information, when it comes to election reporting, radio is actually doing, the covering the least amount of, stories. They are giving less time than television to elections, and it's a very big problem, because then most of the Ugandans who depend on radio for their information do not have enough context to make sense of what's going on, because very many radio stations are steering clear of those stories that offer context and perspective, analysis, and so on.
And in December, Evelyn, I was
Yes.
conducting trainings on election reporting in different parts of the country. I was in Soroti, I was in Kasese, I was in Mbale, and that's a serious problem that we found on the ground, that even the candidates are not getting equal coverage, because a radio station is owned by a politician, and the politician cannot run a story that features the opponent. And they cannot cover a political rally or any campaign activity by a person who is contesting against the radio owner. Even when we put up a story that features both, they will read the part of the radio owner and leave out the part of the other candidate. So it's a serious problem, because the ownership of radio stations across the country, you find that many of them in the countryside are owned by politicians.
So, I mean, just to add on to that, when we look at it generally, not just for a problem for the kind of stories Uganda Radio Network produces, I mean, in general for the media, then that leaves out a very big section of information or people who are not covered. How do you think then, I mean, for Sylvia, how are you guys going about it to make sure that we, as the media, then give coverage to everyone equally, despite these challenges that are there?
For us, we are doing it. We are giving coverage to all candidates equally. We believe that we have 130 radio stations that are subscribing to URN. We believe that if one radio station leaves out a story because the candidate is an opponent of their boss, then another radio station will pick it up, or a newspaper, because we also have subscribers in print and online, or another platform. So we cannot force them to take the stories from Uganda Radio Network the way they are, but we believe that if 1 out of 130 does not use it, the 129 will probably use it, and then it will reach a certain percentage of the audience.
So do the others that use them, then I want to imagine they do not probably cut out the information that their rivals are putting in place, so that,
No. Especially the print platforms and the online platforms, they don't cut out anything. So you will have the whole package there.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Then that's something interesting, I think, that we look at as we go on to discuss this topic. If there are people out there who have probably joined us or who are following the discussion via Facebook, would be glad to hear from you, would be glad to take questions from you also as we continue the discussion. Like we said, we are discussing the role of the media in promoting peace before, during, and after the elections. Already, of course, we are within the coming towards the end of the campaigns, and soon we will be voting, and then there will be the after elections. Coming back to you, Peter, in your assessment, has the media done a good job in general, before then the voting, to address general issues that we think Ugandans want to listen to, but also something that will give them confidence that as they go into this process, the next phase of the process, it should be something that, they will be satisfied with? What's your assessment?
I mean, given the circumstances under which this election is happening, I think we must commend the media for the enthusiasm that many journalists have shown for telling the story. you know, amidst, very many challenges and difficulties. You know, they have gone to great lengths to actually bring us the story. It's not just the police brutality. There is also the issue of COVID-19. I mean, these guys have got to worry about their own health and, you know, and safety. So I think that the amount of coverage we are seeing, you know, speaks a lot to the enthusiasm that these young people, most of whom are covering elections for the first time or second time, have really shown. And some have actually also gone ahead to come up with some innovations like fact checking, like, you know, I've seen on television an attempt to emulate what our brothers and sisters in the West do, which is sort of bring us all these boards that show us, you know, numbers and what these numbers mean. So we are seeing a good attempt to use technology, to maximize or leverage technology to report the story in ways that help citizens understand what's going on. However, there are still very many challenges. One, we have already discussed the excessive emphasis on events, you know, the campaign rallies, the meetings and the violence, and the lack of context. Because I mean, even when you cover events, you still owe it to the audience to offer, you know, them context that helps them understand how to sort of process what is actually going on. We don't see enough of that, especially on radio, but also I think in some cases on television, which is much more visual than perhaps analytical in some cases. Then the other thing is allowing these candidates to get away with all manner of claims without enough scrutiny. You know, we are not seeing that much questioning of candidate claims by many journalists, you know. So we've seen, for instance, that most of the proclamations by the president are reported exactly as he makes them. There is no attempt to, you know, push back and say, but wait a minute, you know, he said this 6 years ago, or you know, this is not true, maybe, or he's being unfair to his opponents, and so on. And then we have also seen that there are very few cases where attacks on candidates, candidates are given an opportunity to respond to attacks on them. Every now and then you will see a Bobby Wine, you know, or one of his spokespersons reacting to in a story that you know, is about attacks by the president. But by and large, most of these attacks, whether they are from the opposition or whether they are from the incumbent, go on, you know, without an opportunity to those who have been attacked, you know, to explain themselves. So for us, I mean, those are still very big issues. Sylvia mentioned the idea of voice to the community, ordinary people. I think that's we have seen some progress there in terms of our numbers. A good percentage of stories actually did have voices of ordinary people, you know, speaking out on what was going on. We wish we could see more of that, because it's not enough to frame the campaign only from the perspective of the candidate. It's also important to frame these elections from the perspective of the people who are going to be affected by the decisions of those who are elected. In any case, the election itself is about the right of the people to express themselves. So we must hear more and more from them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting last point there. You know, we need to frame the elections also, you know, in the way, you know, from the perspective of, just a follow-up question to that, you know, then what do you think is the right time frame for the media to have discussed issues? Because definitely, you know, we know that every election period, whenever we have elections, there are cases of violence that usually happen because some sections are dissatisfied with the outcome of the elections. And really, that's usually where the biggest problem is, that every time, you know, the election has happened, there's going to be violence because a certain section are not agreeable to, you know, the results that have come up. What would be the right time frame for the media then to start discussing, you know, issues, you know, around peace, if we are talking about the role of the media in promoting peace during the elections? When should we start talking about some of these issues? Is it at the beginning of the election? Is it at voting, or is it, you know, post-election? What would be the right time frame?
I think the media at all times should be alive to the possibility that violence could upend the whole process, and therefore I don't think we should actually apportion time and say at this point you focus on peace or focus on conflict, focus on violence or whatever. I think the media just owe it to the public at all times to keep on offering context. If there's a possibility, if the events happening today suggest a likelihood of conflict on election day or after election day, we owe it to audiences to alert them about that. But also it's important that, we point out, the causes of some of these issues, because who knows, maybe if we paid more attention to why this violence is happening, if we named names, maybe a few of the individuals, who are responsible for what's going on can, be forced to self-correct before it's too late. So I don't think that there is a time frame. I think that it is important that we continue focusing on what's going on, making sense of what's going on, why it matters, explaining, the actors, and so on and so forth. Like I've said, for instance, the issue of COVID-19 being used as an excuse to stop the opposition from, having rallies in some places. I mean, on the face of it, it is a legitimate, issue. I mean, we have COVID-19. Very many Ugandans have been, have died, and very many are sick. Our ICUs are full, and so on. But I mean, that story still has to be told within the context of, one, the fact that even before the pandemic, there were very many attempts by the government or by the police to stop the opposition from organizing, from holding assemblies, and so on. That needs to be told. But also the fact that there are so many Ugandans in markets, in taxi parks, in bars, elsewhere, who are going on about their business like there's no COVID-19 at all. Is it right? Is it fair to stop somebody who is holding a campaign for 200 people from, proceeding when actually you are allowing beach owners who are gathering 300, 400, 500 people, to celebrate the new year and so on and so forth. Those are issues we need to keep on bringing out in our reporting of the events of the last few weeks, the events of the coming days of the campaigns before they are, closed.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll just come right back to Peter because I do not see Paul yet on the call here, but yeah, we'll move on, and probably I guess that will give us an opportunity also to finish this discussion, before the time that was allocated, unless there are questions that might maybe come up. Pauline, if there are any questions that are coming up, probably even on the Facebook Live or any other people, participating in the call, if they have any questions for Peter or for Sylvia, would be happy to have those questions and then share them, either in the group or you let us know if anything is up and we keep going on. So back to Sylvia, you people are into the mix, covering the stories. We are just a few days into the elections. What preparations have you made to, as a media house, to be able to ensure that you cover the stories without, I don't know if I could put it this way, like not really creating the kind of tension that we are expecting to see, because I mean, that's inevitable, but yeah, how are you going to deal with that, or how are you prepared to deal with that?
Our preparation started long before, because you see, the moment you finish the swearing in of the president, you start planning for the next campaign or the next election cycle. So our preparation started earlier, and we zeroed more on human resource, because as a network, we want to have eyes and ears in all corners of the country. So we added on our human resource. I actually cannot give you an exact figure of how many journalists we have at the moment, because we are actually relying more on top of the journalists that Uganda Radio Network employs. We also have another category of freelancers. We have another category of community reporters that we have trained on the basic journalism to feed into our network. So people from villages can observe, can take videos or record whatever is happening in their villages and send to our bureau chief. Let's say someone is in Manafa, they send to our bureau chief in Mbale. The bureau chief verifies that information and then files to the editors in Kampala. So that is how we are operating. In terms of coverage, I think on that aspect of human resource, we are doing well, and we are ensuring that all corners of the country are covered. Then what was the other part of the question? To ensure that, we do not cause violence, something like that?
No, to the kind of reporting that doesn't raise tension among the public, the whole preparedness that you have put in place.
We have trained people, yes. And I know that we started this process with the right attitude, that we are going to ensure that we are professional. Like I told you at the beginning, Evelyn, it is very hard to promote peace or to be peaceful in a situation that is not peaceful. So ours is to ensure that we give you accurate reports. It's to ensure that our stories are balanced and they are factual. So I do not know if by bringing facts to the table and verifying my information to ensure that whatever I bring on the table is accurate, then I'll somehow be, so for us, that is what we are doing. And that's what we are focusing on.
Yes, because the question, like you've partly answered it, because we are looking at, journalists having a responsibility to report accurately, fairly, and in a balanced way. As long as you do that, then I guess, even if it's a question of violence happening, if it's something that has been reported fairly, that shouldn't be a problem. But also, the other issue for me is, then how are we going to, you talked about the verification. Is that something that you do for all the stories that come from the community, but also even for your own journalists, that you can hear some information, you can hear someone say something, how fast is the verification process then?
Yes, Evelyn, we have for this campaign period and the first few months after elections, we have a desk which has 6 people, and their only job is to verify the reports that we get. We call them data checkers. That's the name we gave them here. But they help us to verify information that is circulating on social media, and also our very own reports, even after we've published. They go ahead and cross-check and ensure that whatever we have on our website, whatever our subscribers are picking from our website, is verified, and we are not going to get into trouble for misleading the population or writing false news or anything like that. So that was just a new group of people that we brought into the newsroom just for this period, because during a time like this, there's a lot of fake news. There's a lot of information that goes into the public domain, and there's no one to check to see that actually this is true or false. We have seen with voter location slips, you see someone's face appearing on 3 voter location slips, but we do not know where they are coming from. Because if it is circulating on social media, should we take it that, it's happening? And in these days of Photoshop, you want me to believe that because a voter slip has appeared on Facebook with 3 different, names with the same picture, I should take it as the gospel truth. And so that is what that desk is helping us to do. And I really hope that newsrooms can have this group of people to help us verify information before we publish, or even after publishing, if we don't have time. Sometimes we rush to publish, that we have to guarantee that whatever we have on our platforms is actually factual.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I do not know if there are any questions that are coming from Facebook. Pauline, if you could just let us know what's happening there, we would be very glad before we proceed or before we conclude. Is Pauline on the call?
Oh, please proceed. Please proceed.
Okay, yes, because then, I mean, we will need to know when we can stop. We have almost exhausted the questions that we are asking since we don't have the third panelist here. But just to pick on from here, Peter, I know that you've probably talked about this already. Like, for the media, is the environment as it is at the moment ready for us to proceed to the next level of the election cycle as it is?
Yesterday, I saw a list circulating on social media about journalists who have been accredited by the Media Council. I don't know if Sylvia's data checkers have confirmed that that is a legitimate list, but I think it's legitimate, right? And one, a number of media houses are missing, but two, a number of journalists who we know, who cover politics and, the elections are not on that list. Of course, we know that that decision of the Media Council to accredit journalists has been challenged because by the Editors Guild and the Center for Public Interest Law, because the timing particularly and the whole legality of the whole thing, has raised serious, questions. So that is the environment within which these guys are covering the elections. That the police has warned that if you don't have the Media Council badge, you won't be protected, whatever that means, Forgetting, of course, that Ugandans have the right to attend these rallies and report on them with or without badges from the Media Council. And I'm not calling for, lack of regulation. I'm not calling for anarchy here. All I'm saying is that we need to be mindful of the fact that the right to free expression is not simply a right for journalists and the media only. It is a right for all citizens of Uganda. So I don't think that we have had a sober conversation with all actors on what could be done in the circumstances to ensure that, the elections are covered by all who are legitimate actors, including citizens who have an interest in this, and that the journalists who, are reporting for media houses don't have to keep on looking over their shoulders, or tear gas, fearing that they're going to be hit by tear gas canisters or by live bullets and so on. I think that that is something that needs to be looked into. Of course, I mean, it worries me that at the end of the day, if you don't have any media house that has the kind of numbers that can help, cover this election, I mean, throughout the whole country, whether it is URN, whether it is New Vision Group, whether it is Monitor, National Media Uganda, our numbers, journalist numbers are actually quite limited. And as a result, we can only cover a few hotspots here and there. But there are so many things going on all over the country which are left uncovered. I don't know how that is going to end up, affecting citizen understanding of what has happened in the last 2 months or so. But I wanted to tell you something, Evelyn, about my eyes are a bit red because I have been up since early morning watching the returns from the Georgia elections in the United States, the Senate elections there. Now, one of the things that you see for all the chaos that President Trump and his enablers have cemented, tried to provoke, one of the things you see in that country is that the media are able to know, where the results that are being reported are actually coming from. The media are able to know that, voting centers, whatever you call them, reporting, and so has this lead, and so has this lead. That is a very big part of actually what you call peace or conflict, avoidance. The idea that the voters out there will know that, okay, even if on the face of it, our opponent seems to be leading, we still have votes from our stronghold that have not yet come through. We don't have that kind of transparency in Uganda. And I don't hear the opposition talking enough actually about what they are going to do to ensure that come January 14th or 15th, when the Electoral Commission is reporting the results, we actually all have a sense of confidence, one, that these are actually results of Ugandans who cast proper ballots. And two, these are the real results from these elections. What mechanism do we have in place to ensure that, whatever is reported is actually something that, one, gives you confidence that it is coming from polling stations all over the country, and that, two, it is the will of the voter, and that is something that is way beyond what the media can do. So ultimately, it is also about the integrity of those who are in charge of the elections, the integrity of those who are in charge of government, the integrity of those who are in charge of security, police, the army, name it. I think that for all the noise some of our friends here have made about America and their drama in the last several months, at least their institutions have worked. They have shown us, that Republicans have stood up and defied President Trump. Do we have enough Ugandan officials who can defy those with power who attempt to subvert the will of the people? I don't know.
Thank you so much for that, Peter. Actually, one of my last questions that I wanted to ask was about if the media has the capacity to even, look out for some of those hotspots. The Women's Situation Room, I think, in one of their reports for the last election, they mapped out some districts of the country where, perpetually there have been more cases of electoral-related violence. And so the issue I wanted to raise is if our media, based on the previous elections, has the capacity to then map out some of those regions on their own, but also then say, this is where we are going to focus on, because we know traditionally these regions are more prone to violence. Of course, Kampala is no exception. Much of the violence usually happens in Kampala, with or without the media mapping out those specific regions for obvious reasons. Would this be something that would then help in our reporting better of the elections and the outcome?
Maybe Sylvia can tell us about Uganda Radio Network, but I know that Uganda Radio Network and the Visual Group and the Monitor, NTV, NBS, have sufficient numbers to deploy in some of the key areas, for sure. They do have those numbers. That can't be said for most media houses. The radio stations, many of these guys have just about maybe 2 full-time reporters or 3 full-time reporters and a string of freelancers, who are poorly paid. So, so we have to rely on the big ones: Uganda Radio Network, Monitor, New Vision, NBS TV, BBS, NTV, and so on. They too would be stretched. Of course, you're always hoping that they will not be intimidated, that they will stand up to, the forces of, whether it is police, whether it is RDCs, who very often attempt to try and, interfere with reporting on some of those hotspots, some of the issues around violence, conflict, and so on. There are real challenges there, but at least I am sure that we will get a fairly good sense of what's happening from the big media houses. Yeah.
Okay. Sylvia?
Yes, Evelyn. Capacity is relative, even as I have that big number of people that I have told you that we are counting on. I'm sure we cannot be everywhere because let's say having 3 or 4 people covering a district is not enough. You have so many polling stations. So these people have to keep moving from one place to the other. It is not a very easy task, but we are hoping that the teams that we have recruited, plus that string of community reporters, can help us to do it. We also know that many of the radio stations up country, some of them do not actually subscribe to the network, but they do not have reporters. They do not have a team that goes beyond 3 people manning the radio station. So how do you expect such a radio station to be able to cover its jurisdiction? I wanted also to say something about the Media Council and this accreditation process. You remember that during the lockdown, they also subjected us to that kind of registration, and we were asked to send our national IDs, copies, and all that. But then when they were issuing tags, I didn't get one, and I was told I don't qualify as a journalist. everyone who knows me, including you and Peter, know me as a journalist and nothing else. So I was wondering how me, Wilson Kaija, and Sam Guma do not qualify, and then what? So who will qualify if the top people at the network do not qualify? So we have this feeling that even when we are going through this process, the network has not registered any of its people, because we also believe that the community reporters, the freelance writers that we have should also be accredited, but the law doesn't provide for them. So it presents a challenge for us that if the police is going to recognize only those people with the Media Council tag, then the people in this network will be eliminated or they will not be protected. So it presents some funny situation for us. I have just seen a communication from the Editors Guild. There was another case that was filed by the Human Rights Network for Journalists and the East African Media Institute, on Monday. And these two are going to be consolidated, and we shall have, they are fixed for hearing on Monday next week. So we hope that maybe the court process will give some of us some freedom to practice journalism in Uganda, where the Media Council thinks that we do not qualify.
Okay, thank you so much. And maybe your closing remarks, then I get to Peter and we close. I think that would be the end of the discussion, unless otherwise.
Thank you so much again, Evelyn, for giving us this opportunity to talk about our role. Maybe there are people there who do not know what our role as journalists is in an electoral process. And I know that there are also journalists who do not know what their role is. That's why you find a journalist openly endorsing candidates on maybe social media, campaigning for particular candidates and leaving out the other. It presents a funny situation that you're expected to write stories about all candidates and you're endorsing one and not endorsing the other. I believe that while we go through this process, our professionalism is a little bit lacking and we need to do much more than we are doing. Maybe if we fail to deliver on our role as journalists in 2021, the next 5 years will be a little bit better. I believe that the team at ACME can give us training starting 2021 moving forward, that when we get to the next campaign period, we are better prepared. I know that there are organizations that are just conducting election reporting training right now. There's even one that invited me today, and I said, what am I going to learn today when we have less than 10 days to come, rather, to elections? So we need to prepare better. We need to remind all journalists that join along the way, join the profession along the way, that the public is looking at us, and many are believing in us, that when something is said on radio, you cannot change their mindset. They say that was said on radio, it is true. So we have a duty that we have to hold and ensure that we deliver a successful process.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for that. On that note, Dr. Peter, Sylvia has already, made a request, for the African Center for Media Excellence to, do more training for the next elections. So of course, we've seen some of these challenges that you've already, that Sylvia has talked about. I'm sure I've seen it from the reports you've done, when it comes to how we, the media here in Uganda, has covered or is covering this current elections, period. So, I think that's something, of course, I know you take on, and it would be good to have a much better report come the next election. But your closing remarks, Peter.
Thanks, Evelyn. Before the closing remarks, on that very issue of training, I think one of the biggest challenges we have here is the high rate of, occupational mobility, the attrition, from journalism, to other fields. So we will train more people like we did this year, like we did in 2016. But you and Sylvia also know that more people are going to leave journalism in that intervening period. So chances are we will get to 2026 when we still, have a number of reporters covering the election for the first time. That is something that should be addressed, I think, by the media houses. They have to do better in terms of retaining their experienced journalists. They have to do better in terms of making the conditions of work, appetizing for journalists to, not go on to look for the proverbial greener pastures. Look, on this issue of peace and all that, I've always said that I hope, my fear is always that I hope legitimate issues are not swept under the carpet in the name of trying to steer clear of what some may deem as too controversial or, bordering on inciting violence or conflict and so on. I think that, like we have said over and over, if journalists can, rise to the occasion and offer accurate reporting, that is given sufficient context to help people understand what's going on, all will be well. But ultimately, here is a thing. If you live in countries like ours, which have systems that are not always responsive to public opinion and what the media say, whatever we do may matter very little, because ultimately the power lies elsewhere, and I think those people have to be put under pressure through all sorts of forces to ensure that, if nothing else, the morality of their own actions, should be part of the whole big picture, because ultimately, no matter what the media does, if those in charge do not want to give up at all costs, we are going to see, problems. Today, maybe this year, maybe next year, maybe 2026, but we cannot rule out, challenges. So the media has a role to play, but those in charge have an even bigger role to play. The politicians, the candidates have an even bigger role to play. The regulators have to be transparent and accountable to the public, and so on. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Peter. Thank you very much, Peter and Sylvia, for these insights. I hope